Hi there, I'm Luke Hector and this is The Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to raving and ranting about board games, but usually more the latter part if we're honest. This is kind of a weird little speed review here because on the one hand, this is an expansion for a game that's already been out for about a year and a half. The Star Wars Unlimited CCG, TCG, whatever you want to call it, from Fantasy Flight. Now, this is, as I said, an expansion. I have not played the other sets. This is my first intro to Star Wars Unlimited, so this is kind of a mixed review where I'm not only talking about sort of basic concepts with this set, the secrets of power, but also kind of give my thoughts on Star Wars Unlimited as a whole. You know, now that I've had a chance to actually play some of the starter decks, actually play through some games and go, okay, is this game any cool or not? Now, in terms of my history, I have played a bunch of CCGs in the past, back in college times. You know, I was playing things like Aliens, Predator, Pokemon, even Young Jedi. You know, that's not a great game, but I was still playing it. And a few like other ones here and there. You know, some of these more obscure titles that were still CCGs, but I definitely played the Star Wars Decipher CCG, and that was really good fun. I played that competitively. It was brilliant, having all the streamer locations, you know, space and planets, draining force, all these different types of decks you could make. It was a good, fun game. Now, suffice to say, after I got done with Magic the Gathering, I swore I was never going to get into another TCG ever again. I just do not like the model it's based on. LCGs are now a thing, and with Lord of the Rings, Arkham Horror, and Marvel Champions, LCG is the way to go. Make it collectible, you know, you can get a bunch of stuff and, you know, keep going for as long as you want, but I could stop. You know, Lord of the Rings has reached the end of its cycle. Arkham Horror, I stopped buying before the Hemlock Vale one. I felt like I've got enough cards now. It doesn't get played enough to warrant more expansions, and I still keep buying Marvel Champions because they're easy to integrate and I like Marvel. So, you know, but I could stop and I would have loads of content for Marvel Champions. So, you know, LCGs are a lot better, I think. I don't like TCGs for their whole collectible side of things, though. The idea that you're buying boosters, you don't know what you're going to get, it might just be trash, then you get your rare, the rare might be useless to you and not worth that much, and then somebody might get the rare that's foil, super rare, Luke Skywalker or something, and then they scout people on eBay for £100 for a piece of cardboard. I just don't like the TCG nature of things, so I'm not letting that spoil like my view of this game. I'm just going to go into this as the game itself. Ignore all the TCG nonsense. What is this game like to play? What is this set like? What is it like if I just, for example, wanted to grab a couple of starter decks like these? What we got here, we got Palpatine and Padme Amidala, for example. You know, if I just wanted to jump in and play it, is it good enough in its own right?
Wingers, dingus, listen up.
So in a typical game of Star Wars Unlimited, you will have a leader. Now this comes in two different guises, portrait and landscape. It starts off as a leader, but can become a ground unit at some point during a game if you get enough resources. But you'll start off with the leader, and you'll also have a location. This location is just most of the time, with rare exceptions so far, a generic location with a bunch of hit points on it. And the idea is it's whoever knocks out the opponent's base first. Kind of a bit like the Star Wars deck building game that came out recently, which was kind of like the successor to Star Realms, not too dissimilar from that. You will then create a deck. So this is the starter deck for Padme Amidala, for example, but if you want to create a deck using booster packs and that so forth, essentially what you get is on the leader and the location, you end up with up to 3 symbols showing in the little banner corners. And these 3 symbols dictate what cards you're allowed to build your deck with. You can use cards outside of those symbols, but it costs more to do so, so you better have a good reason for wanting to include those in your deck. But it kind of sets you on a sort of template grounding for how you want a deck build in the future. The starter decks are already catered for this, so there's no big deal. And then what happens is you will draw 4 cards from the deck and you will put 2 of them down as resources. So you already start with a couple of resources in front of you. And then what you will do is that you will basically alternate backward and forwards, playing cards and attacking each other in order to try and whittle the base down. So you can play a card from your hand by essentially tapping the resources, much like Magic when you tap land and all that sort of thing. But also, if you have, for example, I've conveniently got a space unit and a ground unit here, the 2 sides of the table, one will represent space and one will represent ground. If you have ready units available, you can essentially tap them and go attack the opponent, and they can attack specific units, or they can attack the opponent's base if there's nothing to defend it with, and so you can chip off, I was about to say victory points, stuck in Euro mode, you know, health points, effectively. And the game sort of goes back and forth in this fashion, but there is also an initiative counter, which enables you to take first player for the next round. And when you finish the round, you will always draw 2 cards from the deck, and you will be able to choose 1 card from your hand, not necessarily one of the ones you just drew, to put down as a resource in front of you. So your resources will build up steady over the course of the game until the point that you think, yeah, you know what, I don't want to play any more resources, I'm good with what I've got. These characters and spaceships and that you play, they'll do all sorts of tricksy things. So they'll have health points, they'll have deployed costs, they'll have symbols that gear off other cards, they'll have keywords like restore and play and reveal and all that sort of thing. They do tricksy things, and it's very much like your typical card game in that respect. You are playing cards to try and outmaneuver the opponent, outwit them at times, and eventually get their base down to 0 HP. That's pretty straightforward an overview as you can get.
That's easy!
So pretty basic overview, and yeah, it is a very basic game. I kind of went into this expecting more of a Decipher Star Wars CCG level of complexity, and it wasn't too disappointed the fact that it was very much easy, but you do need to set your expectations here. This is a pretty straightforward game with not a lot of complexity off the bat. It can get more complex. But, the rules of the game are pretty straightforward. You are playing a card, you're activating a card, and you're attacking an opponent's base or other units, and just deciding what you want to play down as a resource. There's not a huge amount of extra complexity other than just what certain keywords will do in the game. Your leader can eventually become deployed into an actual ground unit, but you have to save up a bunch of resources and do it as an epic action. But once it's done, as soon as they get defeated, then they revert back to a leader, and you can't redeploy them again. So they are kind of a one-shot wonder. So you need to be careful as to when you do it. You might not necessarily want to deploy them the second you can. You may need to wait for the right moment, and that goes particularly more than that for Emperor Palpatine, who really does like to sort of sit back and wait until the time is right. But so it's not really reinventing the wheel here. The mechanics are everything we've seen before in a card game, with, the exception of the way the leaders are done. That is something quite decent, even though it's only a one-shot. But one thing that this game does well in its smooth running is that it speeds up a lot better than other CCGs, because games like Magic and that, you usually have to wait for ages to get the resources you need. Like, you'll draw cards, you may start with a land or something, but then, you'll draw cards that's, oh, for Christ's sake, I can't find my forest. Where the hell are my forests? I just can't play these cards now. And so sometimes you're struggling to get the resources out, and a lot of tournament Magic decks will have ways to fast track the resources as much as possible. But here, you start off with 2 right off the bat. So you've already got 2 to begin with, and then every time you finish the round, you are drawing 2 cards, and you have the choice to put 1 down. And for the first few turns, you're going to do that. So you'll have 2, then 3, and then 4, then 5, then 6. And it means that the game goes at a very good, quick pace. It doesn't bog down while people are trying to set up. That goes double for the idea that you're drawing 2 cards. One problem that a lot of CCGs have, and this is Magic and, pretty much every CCG that's come out that I've played, is the idea that certain cards become absolute staples in the deck, not because they're thematically cool or because they're just powerful like, attack and defense. They become staples because they rely on card draw and resource management. Certain cards in decks, particularly Magic and that, are just staples because they get you this element. Because you're now drawing 2 cards and getting a resource every turn without any help from other cards, those effects, when you see them, are more like bonuses than anything else, particularly the card draw one. So, I'm drawing 2 cards every round, so I'm always going to see new stuff every turn. If a character lets me draw another card for whatever reason, it's a bonus on top of the 2 you already have. Yes, it's cool, it's a nice bonus, but it no longer makes that character feel like it's a necessity to have in your deck. They're not like super powerful or anything like that. Now granted, I have not looked at any of the meta with this game, so I've got no clue what cards are regarded as like the best ever or tournament worthy or whatever. It's like, don't care. But it just means that you don't feel like, oh, it does card draw, therefore I must put it in the deck, at all costs. The starter deck format is pretty decent. You buy one of these Spotlight decks, it gives you a fully functioning starter deck, it gives you a booster pack to expand it a little bit if you want. The characters are, what you would expect. So, I've got a Padme Amidala deck here, and I've already drawn Ahsoka Tano, I've got Anakin Skywalker, Bail Organa, Captain Tyver. You've got a lot of the characters that you would expect to see with this person, and, you know, a few extra ones along the way, like B2 Emo, you know, the one from, what was it called, the Andor series, you know, you've got all these different Naboo ships and that, so it fits, you know, you're not getting weird, obscure characters. I don't expect to pull out, you know, Boba Fett when I play, for example, a Darth Vader deck from the original or something, you know, it's like it's separate things. But it just means that you are getting the people that you want. You know, if you know that you like, you know, the dark side and Tarkin and all those like Andor Imperial type stuff in the background, the political stuff, then you buy the Palpatine deck and you will get those characters. It's nice that it actually, you know, gives you what you're expecting. But yeah, they're fully functional. I've seen people walk around with like little playmat sheets and that help with playing the game. Unfortunately, if you go into this set as your first one, you're not going to see that. And I would have liked something like that, but to be honest, you just basically need location, leader, and then 2 zones, and then your resources in front of you. It's not like I need a play sheet to really help me with that. Although these tokens are god-awful. Oh my god. These are the flimsiest little HP tokens I've ever seen. Like, you know, it's really crappy little like paper style card. It's I know it sounds weird, but it's just, they're really horrible. And when you punch these out, you end up with like the little globules of you know, cardboard that stick out from them because they're not flush to the thing you punch out. And your initiative counter is just this little hexagon thing with Star Wars Unlimited written on it. I mean, I don't expect much from a CGG, and the last time I talked about production quality with a CCG, I got my, you know, rear end handed to me. But yeah, I mean, I would have expected something a bit better than this, you know, production quality wise, but I'm sure most people who play this game have replaced them with much better components anyway. But just know that you're buying cards here. You're not getting anything else in terms of production. The artwork is a bit hit and miss for me, actually. I'm not a fan of this style. I don't think it suits. You know, some art is better than others. I think the spaceships tend to fare pretty well. I think certain characters can come off okay, but then there are certain characters that come off really horrible. I mean, it really is a bit of a Dominion effect of, well, actually, no, Dominion doesn't have any good artwork at all. It's just mismatch. But here it's like, oh, that's a pretty good picture. Oh, that's not, that's not too bad. Oh, that's not another one. And yeah, I've seen examples like if you take 2 of the Han Solo ones from earlier sets and put them together, and you can see one that actually looks half decent and the other one is god nasty. It's I don't know, it looks like a very cheap style of art. I much preferred the art that they used in the deck building game, actually, the Star Wars one, because that one actually, like, you look at the art in there, like, just compare a Stormtrooper in that game with a Stormtrooper in this game, and the other one is light years better. I mean, it's got proper lighting, proper shadow effects, and all that stuff on that picture, and then these ones look very flat, you know, or just weird. You know, they are not great, and certainly it's not going to be a looker when you're playing this game. Graphic design is pretty straightforward, though. It's easy to tell what's what on the card, and even though there is a lot of keywords, the initial starter deck won't be that complicated, but when you start expanding it and trying out new cards now, you're obviously going to come across more keywords, and therefore you're going to have to look up what these mean. And it's annoying that you don't get any kind of rule sheet in the box to help you actually play the game. It forces you to go online and download the rules from the website. That always gets my grit, you know, whenever I see that, but again, rear end handed to me. This is apparently a thing with CCGs now. Apparently the idea of expecting quality components and a rule book when you buy a game is an afterthought. I don't know, but bear in mind you are jumping into this set as an expansion to the old one, so I don't know if the old sets had them included. You know, maybe they had a rule sheet in there, but yeah, it does mean that this is probably not your starting point as a brand new player. You might want to think about jumping into this one as, like, you know, some expanded cards. So with regards to what this set specifically is kind of offering, the main thing is that there's 2 things I kind of draw from this. Firstly, you have got spies. So spies are a new sort of token type that you have in this set. They are effectively 2/2s on the attack. So their raid effectively is the keyword. So they're normally just 0/2s, but on the attack, they'll get +2/+0. So they're not necessarily best for defense, but they're good at sort of like shock troops to hurry up and attack people with. You know, it's a nice, easy thing to keep track of. They can be quite aggressive, you know, lead to some pretty aggressive decks. But, you know, token types are cool in this game, and you've just got a new one here. But this set definitely feels like it adds more tricksy style cards. You know, you get a few games where I've noticed people just have like a ton of units on one side, ton of units on the other, and that. This one is less so about having that kind of play style and more like, I got a few little nifty plots and tricks up my sleeve that could just unbalance things a little bit in my favor. And so, you know, if you're looking to be kind of like those players who play the more tricksy decks, blue magic players would actually be a good comparison actually. You know, they use a lot of tricksy cards rather than having giant beasties everywhere. Then this set's probably going to gear to you more than say some of the original ones. But obviously if you want to get certain characters from those other sets, you're going to have to go back and get them. Although apparently this set is going to get, you know, the system is getting rotated already. I mean, this game's only been out since what, the start of 2024? You know, apparently there's been about 6-7 sets in that time. I mean, Jesus, Fantasy Flight do not sit back and wait for these games to, like, solidify. No, they just pump out content after content. And already they are rotating some of the earlier sets out of tournament play. You can play a format called Eternal, which means you can use all the cards. And frankly, if I was playing this game, I would never go into tournament play. I am done with TCG tournament nonsense after Netrunner and Magic times. But never again. But you know, if I just wanted to like buy a few starter decks, maybe a few boosters, tweak around with it and play it with people I knew, I would just play Eternal format and just say you can use whatever you like, you know, not a problem. But, you know, this is not a game that I intend to be collecting. You know, I've no interest in going down that whole collectible route, but as a game, it's not bad. It's actually alright, you know. I like the speediness of it. I like the fact that it gives you cards and resources every turn without fail, you know, anything else is a bonus. I think that's great. The unique leader and that can deploy, it's cool. I mean, it's a staple for your deck because it commits like at least, you know, one or two of those symbols that you want for how to construct your deck. So you can formulate a sort of strategy around them. And so I like that. You know, there's a decent amount of variety for deck building, for customization, and if you do want to just grab a couple of starter decks and go nuts and have fun with them, then it's relatively cheap to just grab one or two of these decks. You know, just grab the Padme and the Palpatine one. They're pretty balanced. I felt that they were equally matched. You know, I didn't think that one was crazy more powerful than the other. And you can just have a good time and get a game done in a relatively short space of time. So it's not reinventing the wheel. It's not bringing us anything particularly new. It's not going to be as complex or in-depth as the Decipher one used to be, or some of these other CCGs that exist. You know, it's trying to be a more accessible one for those who don't mind the whole CCG format and just want to enjoy a good fun game about Star Wars. So overall, I like it. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. It's good. You know, I've enjoyed the plays I've had of it. And if somebody was to just give me a starter deck or somebody else's deck and say, do you fancy a game? I'll gladly play it and I'll have a good amount of fun. I just don't want to get into that whole collectability stuff, but that's a personal gripe for me against CCGs and TCGs. That's not a gripe on this game. You know, there is plenty of cards out there if you want to get into this proper and collect it, but you might want to stick with one of the earlier sets to like actually jump into the game rather than try and jump into it at this stage. This one isn't particularly new player friendly. It's more, I've been playing the game a bit, I now want to expand into something else. This is a pretty good expansion. So 7 out of 10, I quite like this game. You know, I'm not going to collect it personally, but I enjoy it and I can recommend it for those who are into Star Wars and fancy getting into a CCG that's not too overly complex. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. I suspect I'll put it on the main, I'll put it on the Secrets of Power BGG page, you know, because you could and ah which one you put it on because it's a mixed review in that sense. Don't forget to check out the rest of my content with all the other Essen goodness that has come out. You know, lots of big Euros and lots of other games that I've been doing reviews for, and more to come. I've got to do a lot more videos after this. Obviously, let me know your comments down below. Do you enjoy the game? Do you recommend a particular set for new players? That'd be useful information. You know, how do you find the whole collectability of this? Do you think it's like typical TCG where it's a little bit ridiculous with pricing and trading and how rare certain staple cards are? What's the meta like with this game? Is it just the same cards being used over and over again and it gets a bit boring, so do you welcome the rotation? Or do you think it could have lasted a bit longer before they did that? So it's nice to get some thoughts in the comments from actual like hardcore Star Wars Unlimited players, because I am perfectly just the casual player with this one. So until next time, regardless of whether you shudder at the thought of trading trading and collectible card games. It's still only a game, so decide for yourself whether it's something you want to get into properly or just pick up from time to time. Take care, and bye for now.